Judge Monroe thought he was sentencing a clueless teen until the defendant started dismantling the case like a seasoned lawyer. The air inside the Los Angeles County Courthouse felt thick, almost suffocating. Rows of spectators filled the gallery, murmuring among themselves as they watched the scene unfold. The defendant's table looked too big for the young man standing beside it, hands in his pockets, chin lifted just enough to show he wasn't afraid. Malik Carter, 19, accused of grand theft auto and resisting arrest. The charges were serious, but the way Judge Richard Monroe looked at him made it clear the real trial had nothing to do with the law. Monroe leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming lazily against the polished wood of his desk. He peered down at Malik over the rim of his glasses, his lips twisting into something between a smirk and a sneer. "You think you're some kind of legal expert?" His voice carried a dry amusement. "This isn't a debate club, kid." A few chuckles rippled through the courtroom. The bailiff, the stenographer, even the prosecutor. They were all in on the joke. Malik didn't flinch. He wasn't laughing. He had spent years preparing for this moment, not this exact one. He never planned on standing here as a defendant. But he knew the courtroom like the back of his hand. While other kids memorized basketball stats, he memorized case law. While his friends played video games, he played mock trials in his head, arguing imaginary cases with himself. His mother, Tanya Carter, had worked as a paralegal for over 20 years, and Malik had grown up listening to the stories she brought home. How prosecutors cut corners, how judges played favorites, how some defense attorneys barely tried. He absorbed everything. By the time he was 14, he could break down a trial better than most law students. But none of that mattered to Monroe. To him, Malik was just another kid in trouble. "Let's make this quick," the judge sighed, flipping open the case file. "I have a golf game at 2. The audience chuckled again, but this time something shifted. Malik's lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smirk, because Monroe had just made his first mistake. But the courtroom hadn't noticed yet. The prosecutor, Brandon Ellis, rose from his seat with the air of a man who had already won. His suit was crisp, his tie perfectly knotted, and his voice carried that rehearsed confidence of someone who had delivered the same speech 100 times before. "Your Honor, the state will prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the defendant, Malik Carter, was caught red-handed in a stolen vehicle, a 2022 RDA 6, reported missing just hours before his arrest. Officers pursued him through downtown, where he allegedly attempted to flee before being apprehended. His fingerprints were found on the steering wheel. The prosecution submits that the evidence speaks for itself." The words landed with weight. The crowd in the gallery shifted, whispering among themselves. On the surface, it sounded damning. A stolen car, a chase, running. Judge Monroe glanced at Malik over the rim of his glasses, then turned back to Ellis. "Go on." The prosecutor walked toward the jury box, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. "The defense may try to convince you that this was all a misunderstanding, that Mr. Carter is some unfortunate victim of circumstance," he said, locking eyes with Malik for the first time. "But let's be honest, what kind of victim runs from the police?" The tension in the room thickened. Judge Monroe leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand. Malik didn't blink. Ellis continued, flipping through a stack of papers. "Your Honor, I have here the testimony of Officer Marcus Bennett, who personally witnessed the defendant behind the wheel before he attempted to flee. The car was confirmed stolen. The arrest was made by the book." Monroe exhaled through his nose, nodding. "Sounds straightforward to me." And for most people in the room, it probably did. The case was clear-cut. A stolen car, a chase, an arrest. But Malik had spent too many years studying trials not to see the cracks. Still, he stayed silent, watching, waiting. Judge Monroe tapped his gavel lightly. "All right, let's hear the defense's response." He turned to Malik's lawyer, a public defender named Rachel Myers, who had barely said 3 words since stepping into the courtroom. She stood up, shifting nervously. "Your Honor, my client." Malik placed a hand on her arm, a silent request. She hesitated, then sat back down, and for the first time Malik spoke. "I'll be representing myself, Your Honor." The room went completely silent. Monroe stared at him, clearly amused. "You'll what?" Malik's voice was calm, steady. "I'll be defending myself." A murmur spread through the courtroom. The bailiff's eyebrows shot up. Ellis's smirk faltered for just a second before he let out a sharp laugh. This should be interesting. But no one was laughing when Malik took his first step forward, because everything was about to change. The weight of the courtroom settled around Malik as he adjusted his stance, his hands still in his pockets. He let the silence stretch just a little longer, enough to make them uncomfortable. Then finally he spoke. "Your Honour, before I begin, I'd like to confirm something with the prosecution." Ellis raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms. "Go ahead." Malik took a slow step forward. "You said Officer Marcus Bennett personally saw me behind the wheel before I was arrested, correct?" Ellis exhaled sharply, already bored. "That's right. And that testimony is written in his report?" "Of course it is." Malik nodded, then turned to Judge Monroe. "Your Honour, I move to dismiss that testimony as evidence." Monroe squinted at him. "On what grounds?" Malik pulled his hands from his pockets for the first time and gestured toward the prosecution's table. "Because Officer Bennett never saw me in that car. In fact, he wasn't even on duty when the chase began." A flicker of confusion crossed Ellis's face. "What are you talking about?" Malik took another step forward. "Your Honour, if the court allows me, I'd like to submit a request to verify Officer Bennett's GPS logs from that night. If his report says he witnessed me in the vehicle, then it should match his location history. But he let the word hang in the air. I have a feeling it won't." Now the murmurs in the gallery grew louder. Monroe frowned, glancing toward Ellis. Councillor Ellis cleared his throat, his jaw tightening. "That report was filed by an officer of the law, Your Honour. Are we really going to take the word of a defendant over a trained professional?" Malik gave a small, almost casual shrug. "If the officer was where he claimed to be, then the GPS data will prove it. But if he wasn't," he let the sentence trail off. Monroe studied him for a long moment, then turned to Ellis. "Does the prosecution have any issue with verifying the officer's GPS logs?" Ellis hesitated. The pause was just long enough. The jury noticed, the gallery noticed, and most importantly, the judge noticed. Malik took a quiet breath. He had spent years watching trials, studying prosecutors, their tactics, the way they played the system. And there was one thing he knew without a doubt. If Ellis was confident in his case, he wouldn't be stalling. Monroe sighed, rubbing his temple. Councillor Ellis finally shook his head. "No objections, Your Honour." But the shift had already begun. For the first time, the courtroom wasn't laughing anymore.